by the way, I think what's so comforting about these words is that sometimes when you're a believer and your greatest priority is to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you get depressed over your depression, sad over your sadness. Like, I'm a mu'min, why should I be feeling this way? Why am I feeling sad? Why am I stressed? Why am I scared? Why do I feel anxiety? Shouldn't I be a believer? Shouldn't I not feel these feelings? Because you hear some statements and you think, well, sabr is, I'm clearly not having sabr. SubhanAllah, every single prophet of Allah mentioned in the Quran in their hardship, Allah mentioned their inner fear, their inner vulnerability. Whether it was Musa alayhi salam on the run, or Yusuf alayhi salam in the well, or Yaqub alayhi salam waiting for Yusuf alayhi salam, or Ayyub alayhi salam, or Ibrahim alayhi salam when he was leaving his father after being thrown in the fire. Every single prophet of Allah is described with the trait of sadness and fear and brokenness on the inside. And that's why Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah is saying this is so important to clarify and to say it over and over again. And he says, وَقَالَ أَبُو عَلِيٍّ الدَّقَّاقِ حَدُّ الصَّبْرِ أَلَّا تَعْتَرِضْ عَلَى التَّقْدِيرِ. He said that, Abu Ali al-Daqqaq said that what is required of patience is that a person, or the definition of patience is that a person does not question the qadr of Allah. That's where it starts. You don't question the qadr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You're not going to question the decree of Allah. As the Prophet ﷺ did not say, why Allah did you give me Ibrahim and then take him away from me this way? At no point is there a question of the decree of Allah. He says, going on, فأما إظهار البلاء على غير وجه الشكوى فلا ينافي الصبر. قال الله تعالى في قصة أيوب عليه السلام إنا وجدناه صابرا مع قوله مسني الضر. He said that, look at Ayyub alayhi salam, the fact that these things, talking about your calamity, making it very clear that you're in calamity, that you're in pain, does not contradict being a patient person. He said because Allah described Ayyub alayhi salam as inna wajadnahu sabira. We found him to be a patient person. But then also says that Ayyub alayhi salam said, Massani ad-dur, that I've been struck with pain, even if it came after a long time. He admitted his pain to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. قُلْتُ فَسَّرَ اللَّفْظَ بِلَازِمِهَا. He said, so I'm saying that he has explained once again the outcome, that patience is defined by a very practical outcome, not an internal feeling here. Do you question the decree of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when these things happen? And he says, وَأَمَّا قَوْلُهُ عَلَى غَيْرِ وَجْهِ الشَّكْوَى فَالشَّكْوَى نَوْعَانْ أَحَدُهُمَا الشَّكْوَى إِلَى اللَّهِ فَهَذَا لَا يُنَافِ الصَّبْرِ كما قال يعقوب عليه السلام إنما أشكو بثي وحزني إلى الله مع قوله فصبر جميل. He said that complaints are of two types. There's the type of complaint that is to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that does not negate patience. He says, as Yaqub alayhi salam said, I complain of my pain and my sadness to Allah, with his statement, فَصَبْرٌ جَمِيلٌ. What a beautiful patience. So he's telling his sons, I am complaining, but I'm not going to complain to you. I am in a state of complaint right now. I am hurting, I am crying, but I'm crying to Allah and I'm complaining to Allah. And at the same time, he also said to them, فَصَبْرٌ جَمِيلٌ. وَقَالَ أَيُّوبَ عَلَيْهِ السَّلَامُ مَسَّنِيَ الضُّرُّ مَعْ وَصْفِ اللَّهِ لَهُ بِالصَّبْرِ. And he said, and Ayyub alayhi salam mentioned that harm has struck me with the way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala described him, with patience. وَقَوْلِ سَيِّدُ الصَّابِرِينَ صَلَوَاتُ اللَّهِ وَسَلَامُهُ عَلَيْهِ اللَّهُمَّ إِلَيْكَ أَشْكُو ضَعْفَ قُوَّتِي وَقِلَّةَ حِيلَتِي الْحَدِيثِ. And he said, and the saying of the master of all of the messengers, Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, when he said, O Allah, to you I complain about my lack of strength and about my incapability, about my pain and my humiliation. والنوع الثاني شكوى المبتلى بلسان الحال أو المقال فهذا لا يجامع الصبر بل يضاده ويبطله. He says, describing the second type of complaint, he said it's the one that's affected by, or that's made by an affected person, by words and by deeds, and this is not compatible with patience. Rather, it opposes it and it is detrimental to it. He says, فَالْفَرْقْ بَيْنَ شَكْوَاهُ وَالشَّكْوَى إِلَيْهِ. He said, and so the difference is between complaining about Allah and complaining to Allah. He said that's where the difference is actually going to be found. And he mentions that we will come back to this in a future chapter. And I want to mention just one more small section of this chapter because it's a really beautiful definition he gives. He says, وَقِيلَ الصَّبْرُ ثَبَاتُ الْقَلْبِ عِنْدَ مَوَارِدِ الْاضْطِرَابِ والصبر والجزع ضدان ولهذا يقابل أحدهما بالآخر قال الله تعالى عن أهل النار سواء علينا أجزعنا أم صبرنا والجزع قرين العجز وشقيقه والصبر قرين الكيس ومادته فلو سئل الجزع من أبوك لقال العجز ولو سئل الكيس من أبوك لقال الصبر. He says that الصبر ثبات القلب عند موارد الاضطراب. He said that patience is actually the stability of the heart when hardship is faced. And he's actually making a distinction between happiness in the heart and steadiness of the heart. And that's an important distinction. He says that Allah makes this comparison in the Quran when he talks about the people of hellfire and he complains al-jaza'. Al-jaza' is to be extremely paranoid, lost, just panicky, like really, really panicky, right? So he says that the way Allah described the people of hellfire, سواء علينا أجزعنا أم صبرنا. They said, you know, look, it's the same for us. We're going to be punished whether we panic or whether we are patient. So he's saying the fact that Allah put panic and patience as two separate opposing qualities tells you something. And he says, وَالْجَزَعُ قَرِينُ الْعَجْزِ. He says that jaza', that panicking, it is the partner of al-ajz, just complete inability. You can't get anything done if you're constantly living in that type of anxiety, that level of panic. So there's a level of panic that's not sadness. There's a level of panic that completely shuts you down. And he's saying that that jaza' is the partner of panic. And he said, فَلَوْ سُئِلَ الْجَزَعُ مَنْ أَبُوكَ لَقَالَ الْعَجْزِ. He said that if al-jaza', panic, was to be asked, who is your father? It would say al-ajz, incapacity. وَلَوْ سُئِلَ الْكَيْسِ مَنْ أَبُوكَ. Case here is referring to intelligence, clarity, the ability to still see things for what they are, have perspective. So if perspective was to be asked, who is your father? Perspective would say, my father is patience. I'm born out of patience. Perspective is born out of patience. Steadiness is born out of patience. Panic is born out of a lack of patience in this regard. So he's saying sadness is one thing, but that sadness and that grief is not just not questioning the qadr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There has to be a manageable level here that you try your best to at least get to a point where you're still able to move forward, you're still able to act with clarity and perspective. And that's really where the Quran and the Sunnah give us some clarity, that you still have sort of your boundaries outlined. And of course he goes through some of the other types of patience. And in conclusion here, Shaykh, I think as he goes through the types of patience, he says, look, some people have patience with some things and not others. Just because you're patient in one regard doesn't mean that you're patient in others. So he says some people are patient with the most difficult trials in life, but they have no patience with their desires. SubhanAllah, like they're so patient with difficulty and hardship and being beaten down and just tried with their faith, but then you give them access to their desires and they have no patience with their desires. So he starts going through, he says, listen, patience is a quality that has to overwhelm all of your faculties at some point. And that's what Ali radiallahu anhu was saying. It's that mount that you ride that doesn't stumble.